Hello, welcome to Esther's Gardening Adventures. I'm Esther, and this is part 2 in my Winter Sowing 101 series. And today I'm going to be talking to you about when should you winter sow your plants, your seeds. And I will say that my experience is primarily in Zone 7A, so that's where I can provide probably the most beneficial use to you. But I am part of winter sowing groups that have given guidance, and I will pass that along here. I learned a lot of what I know from a woman called Cheryl Mann, who has a winter sowing group that you can look up. And I will link to that group in my show notes, so you can check it out there as well. All right, so for zones 1 through 7, the colder zones, which is like northern US, maybe even like lower Canada, down to where I am, like the mid-Atlantic area, although it changes for the map. So just like look up your zone, just what zone am I in, and give your zip code, and it'll tell you. If you're in zone 1 through 7, all you have to worry about is making sure that the temperatures at night are consistently cold enough. And what I mean by that is like the temperature should be in the 30s or lower, maybe even the low 40s. Once you see that that is happening on a consistent basis, or you're aware that it's happening on a consistent basis. So like for my area, that's usually like late January is pretty safe time. Maybe even February is a pretty safe time when it's sort of the dead of winter, they say. Once that happens, you're fine to winter sow anything, anytime from there until basically your average last frost date, which you should also look up if you don't know it at this point. For me, the average last frost date I think is in April. If you're in zones 8 through 10, which is like southern US, which has warmer temperatures generally and has an earlier spring as a result, I have heard that you can winter sow anytime starting now. Basically, when your winter starts, you can start winter sowing. So it's a little less complicated. Now, a lot of people tend to be a little more nuanced in when they winter sow, but really I wanted to start off with the basics because those two things are really all you have to worry about. And also I'll just add, it's okay to play around and test it out. Seeds are very inexpensive. Soil's a little more expensive right now, especially with the demand, but you can do a jug now-ish or like in like February, and do another jug in March and see which one performs better and kind of learn from the process. So like figure out for your zone and your area what works best for you. All right, now for the nuances. In my area, and I'm going to talk about zone 7A in Maryland, last year I did my winter sowing process. Now, granted, I only learned about the process like in February, so it was March when I started my jugs, and that turned out fine. The only nuance I will add is we had sort of weird spring where it got warm kind of early, and then we had a really late season frost. And that meant that I had to keep plants in the jugs longer than I would have liked to, particularly the ones that can only handle warmer temperatures like tomatoes, peppers, zucchini, cucumbers, things like that. And they started outgrowing the jugs. They started coming out the tops of the jugs, and their leaves were crowding inside the jugs, and they were touching the sides of the jugs. So when it was freezing outside, even though the inside of the jug was warmer, just by touching the side of the jug, they would get frost burn, and it just was harder on the plants. So what I'm going to do this year, keep in mind, plants will not germinate until it's warm enough. So they're basically dormant in those jugs through the whole winter. And if they do sprout, it's okay because you can throw a blanket over all of them and keep them safe. So really it's fine because the jugs are warmer inside than outside. It's probably like 10 to 15, maybe even more warmer inside the jugs than outside. But so that I can avoid having that overcrowding situation happening again this year, I'm going to winter sow the jugs for the plants that either need an extended period of cold, like winter stratification, which tend to be perennials or native plants. I'm going to do those first, and I'm also going to winter sow the plants that can handle a little bit, that are spring plants that can handle a little bit of frost. And the reason I'm doing those first is because I can transplant them out of the jugs earlier in the season. Not having to do with when they're going to sprout. They'll all probably sprout around the same time. And then I'm going to sow my fast growing summer vegetable plants probably in late March and early February. The one exception to that is peppers. and probably eggplants, because those plants tend to grow slower. They tend to not take up the jugs as much. And so I'm not as concerned about them outgrowing their jugs and having health issues as a result. So again, what I recommend is starting to save up your jugs and other things now. Start looking online and going out and getting the mediums that you need to put, the materials that you need to put your jugs together. And the next episode, I'm going to go through that list for you, as well as what I recommend for containers, what has worked well for me for containers for winter sowing. So if you're curious, please check back in, hit that like button if you enjoyed this, and please ask any questions. I'll do my best to answer. And please consider subscribing if you aren't already, and make sure to hit that bell so that you get alerted when I put up new videos. And otherwise, I will see you next time.